On behalf of the House Democratic Caucus, I want to thank all the members of the press corps for being here on this momentous occasion. About a week ago, Wednesday, I sat down with the governor and her staff to continue our budget negotiations that we had started towards the end of last session and then picked up with speed after the Supreme Court had ruled the cigarette fee unconstitutional. And so we'd spent, last Wednesday was the culmination of 6 weeks of pretty intense negotiations, and then on top of the last month of negotiations in the legislative session. Our caucus for the last several years, in fact, has been calling on a significant revenue package to not only fill the budget gaps that exist in our state budget, but to start to reinvest in those core services like education and health care. We started the battle 2 years ago when our caucus stood firm against a cigarette tax increase as a standalone measure, saying it would take more than just a cigarette tax to solve our state budget problems. We did it again this session, standing firm and on principle, saying that we needed more revenue than just the $200 million that would have been generated from the cigarette fee. Today, I come to you with an announcement that my caucus is proud to say that we are in agreement with a plan that the governor and I and House and Senate Republicans have at least contributed to over the last 6 weeks. Today we're rolling out what we're calling the bipartisan Oklahoma plan. It's a plan that is not my plan or the House Democrats' plan. It's a plan that is not Governor Fallon's plan. It's not the Speaker of the House's plan, nor is it the pro tem of the Senate's plan. But it is a combination of all of the different ideas and concepts that each of the leaders in this building have called for as a way to solve the budget problems. And so this morning, what I want to do is lay out the components of this plan, a plan that I believe is the largest bipartisan agreement, the most significant bipartisan agreement to come out of this building since House Bill 1017 in 1990, when then Republican Governor Henry Bellman worked hand in hand with the Democratic legislature and a Democratic Speaker in Steve Lewis to strike a deal that raised significant revenue to invest in our public school children. It's a plan that we are excited about and that we're hoping that the citizens of this great state will join in our excitement and enthusiasm and get behind, hoping to ensure its passage sometime in this special session. The components of the plan are these. The House Republicans have asked for a $1.50 cigarette tax increase, and our caucus has agreed to do that. The Senate Republicans have asked for a 6 cents per gallon fuel tax increase. Now, that's something that was not in our Restoring Oklahoma plan. It was not something that my caucus was enthusiastic about. In fact, for most of you, you remember just a few months ago when we stood outside an on-cue just a few blocks from here and said that our caucus would not support a fuel tax increase. But as part of a bipartisan package, we understand what compromise is all about. And so our caucus has agreed to support the Senate Republicans' plan to raise the fuel tax by 6 cents per gallon. The governor and other House Republicans have said that if we were going to do anything significant in a bipartisan package, that they wanted to do something that pertained to wind. And so in the package that was put before us, there is an elimination of the sales tax exemption for wind. Our caucus does not like that in the least. We didn't include it in our Restoring Oklahoma plan, but we understand that in a compromise situation, sometimes you have to do things that you may not have otherwise wanted to do, and our caucus is willing to do that. And then the last thing that the governor asked for was a series of service taxes. She laid out $900 million worth of them, and our caucus did not support the lion's share of them. But in this bipartisan Oklahoma plan, there are about $48 to $50 million worth of service taxes on what the governor considers to be luxury services, about 12 of them on things like long-term auto leases and aircraft rental. And our caucus has agreed to stand with the governor's proposal on the service taxes. So whether it was the House Republicans' cigarette tax, the Senate Republicans' fuel tax, or the governor's wind and service taxes, our caucus has agreed to accept them all as part of this bipartisan package. In exchange, what our caucus has called for the last number of years is an increase in the gross production tax to a minimum of 5%. Originally, we staked out our position that we thought it should be 7% on all wells, which would bring in something like $500 million into the state's budget. We compromised off of that position down to 5% on all wells, which would bring in about $300 million. The governor's office was uncomfortable, and the Senate and House Republicans are still uncomfortable with that number. And so the governor's, in this plan, this bipartisan Oklahoma plan, the governor had agreed to include a 5% GPT on just new wells, at which point our caucus appreciated the governor's willingness to compromise on that issue with us, and we have accepted that 5% on just new wells, new gross production rate. And then last but not least, we have said all along that Part of the reason we're in this mess is because of $1.5 billion worth of income taxes that have taken place over the last decade, and we think that as part of the solution, restoring some of those income tax cuts on high earners should be part of it. And so in the bipartisan Oklahoma plan, we restore income tax cuts on high earners, on individuals making $250,000 a year or families making $500,000 a year. We restore the income tax rate from 5 to 525. And on individuals making $500,000 a year and families making over $1 million a year, we restore the income tax rate from 5 back to 5.5. When you include the entire package together, it totals to about $560 million worth of revenue that can be used for these core purposes. And this is why it's so important. It's the only plan, the only bipartisan plan that not only backfills the holes to protect further cuts to mental health, health care, and to DHS, but also allows us to invest in things like public schools and teachers. This plan would include a $2,000 across-the-board teacher pay raise. Mind you, we don't believe $2,000 is enough. Our caucus has said all along that we think a minimum of a $5,000 pay raise is what's necessary to help bring our teachers up to the regional average and show them that we care about them as much as our words do in this building. However, we understand as part of a compromise, we weren't going to get all that we wanted, but we think that these resources being used to help increase teacher salaries to the tune of $2,000 is a good first start. And we know that long term, that by moving to a gross production tax of 5%, which just next year would bring in about $20 million, as all the new wells in the state are drilled and come online, we're talking about an increase of somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million in years 3, 4, and 5 of this plan. That would then allow us to use those dollars to increase state employee pay and also to increase teacher salaries up to that $5,000 level where we think they should be. So that is our plan. And before I take questions, we've asked a couple of folks to join us today to hopefully encourage a bipartisan effort to get this bill across the finish line. Joining me today from OEA is the Vice President of the Oklahoma Education Association, Katherine Bishop. She will speak just momentarily, and then when she's done, joining me, the President and CEO of the McCurtain Memorial Hospital, Ms. Jahni Tapley, is here as well. And so at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Katherine.
My name is Katherine Bishop. I'm a 23-year career educator, and I serve as the Vice President of the Oklahoma Education Association. The Oklahoma Education Association strongly endorses Governor Fallon's bipartisan Oklahoma plan that she has recommended. We applaud Governor Fallon's bold leadership in proposing a common-sense, achievable solution to move our state beyond its current budget crisis. In this bipartisan spirit, I'm joined today by both Republican and Democrat educators. Shauna Carter is a principal in Mustang Public Schools. Chelsea Fu is a teacher in Edmond Public Schools. The 35,000 members of the Oklahoma Education Association are both Republicans and Democrats. And we work together daily to make sure that our students have a great public school. This plan still leaves work to be done in the upcoming legislative session to create a long-term plan to increase education employee salaries to be competitive with surrounding states. A large number of our education support professionals live below the poverty line, and this plan overlooks their need for a pay raise. And while this plan provides teachers with a much-deserved raise, it falls short of the significant pay increase they need. But today's plan gives us hope in setting a path for continued revenue growth. We urge every lawmaker to come together to support Oklahoma bipartisan plan. The special session provides our elected officials with a rare opportunity for a second chance to get it right and to put our budget on sound footing for the future. Much like educators, the job of our lawmakers that they've taken on is not an easy task. But Oklahoma students are counting on them to get the job done. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you all so much for having us here today. As I mentioned, I am the CEO of McCurtain Memorial Hospital. And to give you a little background, I was here a little over a year and a half ago begging and pleading that this state, my home state, do something to prevent further cuts to Medicaid. Unfortunately, for rural hospitals, we were spared any additional cuts. But at what cost? We saw public schools and higher educations have their throats slit. We saw our health departments bleed out. We saw state agencies pillaged, raped, drowned, and slammed, and those may be harsh words, but they're true. And to what end? My hospital kept its doors open, barely, but we're open, and I'm grateful for that. The people of Eufaula, Oklahoma, and Sayre and Frederick, Oklahoma, they weren't quite as lucky. So as we stare into this giant black hole of a deficit created by people who stand up on soapboxes and pedestals and preach about the sanctity of life, but honor the sanctity of the almighty dollar, I once again stand here today unsure and fearful about the future of my hospital and my county. I'm not sure how many more hospitals have to close because this legislature realizes that rural health care absolutely, without a doubt, cannot withstand any further cuts. Yesterday, I saw that a proposed 9% cut to Medicaid was on the table. Let me be clear. We, rural hospitals, rural health care, cannot and will not survive any additional cuts. As it stands, my hospital loses $1.2 million each year simply because we offer Medicaid services. My hospital serves a county of 36,000 people. We deliver over 300 babies each year. We are the only labor and delivery facility in a 60-mile radius and the only labor and delivery facility within a 100-mile radius in the state of Oklahoma. Our God-fearing population does not support abortions, and neither do I. I'm pro-life and I'm proud of it, but I'm pro-life for the whole life. I believe if we're going to encourage these young, often poor, often uneducated ladies to have a child instead of aborting it, then we as a state need to be prepared to help support these young women and these babies until they are able to do so on their own. If we continue these draconian cuts, as our governor so rightly put it, and thank you, Governor Fallin, for acknowledging that. If we continue these cuts, how can we rightly call ourselves a pro-life state? And make no mistake, the cuts to Medicaid services will not only affect young mothers and children, but they also affect our elderly. They affect people who have worked their entire lives and now rely on the services of Medicaid. Services they've paid for and services they were once guaranteed, but services that have now been yanked from them, leaving rural hospitals, hospitals in general, and nursing homes without payer sources, forcing us to choose between paying payroll or taking care of the elderly. Nursing homes currently make $20 less per day than what they are paid to care for Medicaid patients. Too many times, my hospital and others around the state have been forced to choose between paying for food and medication for our patients or paying payroll taxes. If we continue to cripple rural hospitals, hospitals that serve our most tired, our weakest, and our poorest citizens, then tell me how we are showing them the love of Christ as we as Christians are called to do. I was told recently that rural hospitals just need to be better stewards of our money. And to that I ask you, how can I be a better steward of negative $1.3 million? How can I be a better steward and make more conservative and wiser choices on how to use the $3,200 a day that my hospital loses because we provide Medicaid services? I have dedicated and passionate employees who have been furloughing for over 3 years. We've forgone raises for over 6 years. We operate with skeleton crews on shoestring budgets. And at the same time, we've managed to improve our quality of care and we've managed to improve the services that we offer our patients. We don't need to be better stewards of our money. We need a legislature that is a better steward of its money. Today, I stand here and I know I sound angry, but I'm actually so grateful that we finally have a proposal. We finally have some hope. I'm grateful to Governor Fallin, to the members of this caucus who support this proposal. It's refreshing. I know it is, and I know people across the state of Oklahoma are finally saying yes. It's refreshing to see our representatives forgoing party lines and fighting for their state. And so to all of our representatives, to members of both the House and the Senate, I say this. If you're a Republican and you refuse to consider this proposal because it has an increase in the GPT and because it has an increase in the income tax, or if you're a Democrat and you refuse to consider this proposal because it contains a cigarette tax or other things that you may find unsavory, then go home. Your state does not need you. You're not a statesman, you're a politician. Bring me the statesmen. Bring me the men and the women who are prepared to fight for their state and not their party. For those members of the legislature who represent the larger districts in Oklahoma City and Edmond and Tulsa, you may not understand the importance of rural health care and rural hospitals. I hope and I pray that you do. But just to show you how closely it can hit to home, let me leave you with these three names: Dr. Jack Migliaccio, Dr. William Harrison, and Dr. Michael West. Members of your districts owe their lives to these three men. They owe their lives to the staff at McCurtain Memorial Hospital. While visiting our beautiful county and spending time on Broken Bow Lake, one of the top tourist attractions in our state, these members of your districts were involved in car crashes, boating accidents, and suffered near deadly snake bites. But because my hospital was open, families from your district were able to return home with their lives and their entire families intact. If you don't stop these cuts, if you don't find a way to restore Medicaid reimbursements, I cannot promise that that'll happen again. I can't promise that my hospital doors will be open for your community or mine. It's time for members of both parties to step down from their soapboxes and step up to the table prepared to compromise. Find a solution before more hospitals close, more lives are lost, and the blood of Oklahomans are on your hands. Thank you.
Let me conclude with this. You've heard the dire situation that the state is facing, and this is the only bipartisan solution on the table that actually meets the needs that our educators and our healthcare providers have laid out before you today. And so we're excited about this solution. We're excited about this plan. And what we want the voters, we want the citizens of Oklahoma to understand is that we've heard you. For the last couple of years, and in particular for the last couple of months and weeks, we've heard the citizens of this great state tell us two things. They said, find revenue and work together. Find revenue and work together. Stop the finger pointing. Just find revenue and work together. This plan, which isn't my plan or the governor's plan or the speaker's plan or the pro tem's plan, but it's a bipartisan plan of all of our ideas coming together. This plan does that. It finds revenue and it stops the finger pointing and works and allows us to work together. And so today we stand before you, a caucus of 28 members, unified in our support behind the bipartisan Oklahoma plan that the governor and I have struck. The hope is now that the citizens of this great state will contact their legislators, contact the Speaker's office, contact the Pro Tem's office, and tell them how much you appreciate this effort, how much you support the plan, even if you don't like everything that's in it, that you understand that compromise is what this building is all about, and that is what this state absolutely needs. Our caucus, technically speaking, our caucus in the past had rejected the wind sales tax. We had rejected the tax increase on fuel, and we'd also rejected the service taxes, just as they had rejected gross production taxes and income tax increases on their end. But our caucus understands that we have to work together with the folks in charge, and so we have agreed to compromise on those positions, things that we didn't want to do, but we understand that they're necessary for a bipartisan agreement. So we've moved, and we understand that we're asking for them to come to us. And the fact that the governor was willing to put all the pieces on a paper that had a 5% gross production tax with an income tax restoration, plus those plans, those components of the plan that the House and Senate Republicans wanted, I think is a good sign that a bipartisan solution is absolutely possible. For the first time in the negotiations with us over the last 2 years, the governor and I have come to an agreement on a series of revenue-raising measures around the gross production tax and the income tax that is actually palatable to us, and so much so that we're willing to actually expand what we wanted. Make no mistake about it, when we had this conversation, I've said it in this press room dozens of times, from our initial bargaining standpoint, we said if they would restore the gross production tax, we would vote for the cigarette tax. If they would restore income taxes, we would support a fuel tax, potentially. But what we've done now is we've expanded beyond that. We've gone from a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-2 position to now we've accepted, we're going basically 2 for 4. We're accepting four components of the plan that weren't necessarily palatable to us or to our constituents, but we're willing to do it because we believe that this is the right thing to do. So we're not pointing any fingers at anybody. I appreciate the Speaker's tireless resolve to try to come up with a plan that would work. We're not on the same page with some of the ideas that he's floated out there, but I think this plan together gets that done. What the purpose of this is to let the citizens of the state know that there's a real hope. There's a real solution on the table, a bipartisan Oklahoma plan that can meet the needs of not just filling the $200 million that we lost from the cigarette cigarette fee, but also to start investing in healthcare and education and other core services. The fuel tax, for example, increase would go to help fund roads and bridges, to help protect the 8-year roads and bridges plan that had so many of their projects put on hold or stopped altogether. And so we want the citizens who may have been watching for the last week or so, wondering what in the world are they doing up there. We want them to know that there really is hope. We want them to give them something to rally behind. And whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, I promise you, there are things in this plan that you'll find that you can like, and there are things in this plan that you'll find that you don't like, because that's the way it is for us. But when that happens, in my experience in 11 years in this building, working as a minority leader, when you find something that not everybody likes, but things that at least portions of it everybody can rally around, I think that's a good compromise, and we're hoping the citizens will get behind it. So our caucus has said all along that we don't support forced rule consolidation, and that component is not part of this plan. Matter of fact, when the governor and I sat down and visited last Wednesday to discuss the framework of this plan, she never offered it to us, and she never asked us to support it. We've said all along, if the folks in charge, if they want to consolidate rural schools, it only takes 51 votes to do that, and they have 72, they can do that. We don't think that's the solution. We think the solution is finding revenue, not shutting down rural schools. And this plan that we put together with components from all 4 caucuses and the governor's proposals does that without hurting rural communities. Matter of fact, it actually starts to reinvest in rural communities in health care as well as in education. I don't think that necessarily they're ready to vote on anything on Monday. I think it was just a tentative. Let's all get back together in case there is a deal struck. I know that I've met with the governor's office either in person or on the phone every day this week, and it was at least a weekly meeting or phone conversation for the last 6 weeks to get to this point. I will be sitting down with the Speaker of the House on Sunday evening. He and I will be there to discuss the major components of this plan, and if he has any tweaks that he would like to offer to it. Our caucus is certainly willing to compromise. We've already demonstrated that by accepting this plan as it is in a major compromise fashion. And so the hope is that come Sunday evening, when the Speaker and I sit down together face to face, that we'll be able to take the bones of this plan, and if he wants to tweak a few things here and there, my caucus is willing to have that discussion because it's high time that health care, education, public safety, and transportation get properly funded, and it's time to stop the finger pointing, and that's what we're here today to stop. It's also our understanding that there are discussions taking place now as to where we might be able to reconvene the legislature should we not be able to do it in this building. And I think that's important because I don't want us to stop and let the longer this goes, as every day goes by, the budget cuts that are happening to health care and education and DHS and mental health, those budget cuts get deeper and deeper and harder to fill for this fiscal year. And so I don't think it would be appropriate for us to sit back and say, well, let's just wait till the power comes back on in this building. If we've got to go meet at my house in the south side of town, I'll welcome them all. There's a couple maybe. No, I'll welcome all 101 of them in, and we can sit down and vote on it, and we'll let all the press in as well. I think that they're still trying to get a feel for whether their caucuses are as comfortable with the plan as ours are. I know, having spoken with members of the House Republican caucus, members of my caucus, having spoken with members of the Senate Republican caucus, that there is support for this plan within members of their team. It's just whether or not they've got 25 or whether or not they've got 36 or whatever they need over in the House side in order to put the plan up for a vote. I think they're trying to figure out whether their caucuses are comfortable with it. And I know this, that if we were just to sit back and not give the citizens of this state hope, let them know that there's something out there that they can rally behind, then something like this plan, which is really the biggest bipartisan compromise legislation in 27 years since Henry Bellman and Speaker Lewis struck House Bill 1017. This is that significant, and if we don't get the voters behind it, then it'll languish on the vine, and what will end up happening is we'll have some small budget cuts that end up happening that end up hurting hospitals, not getting the needs met where we need to be, and we push ourselves into an election year, which will be much more difficult, we believe, to get the folks in charge to raise revenue. So this is our one window of opportunity. Matter of fact, a window of opportunity that comes along once in a generation, and we don't want to miss it. There's only 2 components of this 6-component plan that are things that we asked for. The other 4 all came from House Republicans, Senate Republicans, or the governor. The Senate Democrats and we asked for a restoration of income tax and then restoring the gross production tax. The income tax at the rate that it's set within this plan only brings in about $36 million. It applies to just a few thousand filers, about 26,000 filers. It's a small percentage. So in that case, if they wanted to come in and negotiate around income tax, From their perspective, there's only two ways you can go. You could eliminate it altogether, and if you do that, then our caucus would say, well, why would we accept 5 things, raise fuel taxes when you're not asking high-income earners to give back? So that's really not practical. Or they could raise it higher. They say, well, let's raise those brackets higher, and at that point, you end up bringing virtually no money in. And our perspective is if you're going to take a tough vote, and make no mistake about it, this would be the most difficult vote that I, in 11 years, or Representative Rosecrans in just 11 days, will ever take in our career. We understand that. But if you're going to take that vote, by gosh, let's bring in real revenue. And so we don't see them tweaking the income tax, or there's not much room there. On the gross production tax, we've said all along that we think it ought to be 5%. I think it ought to be 7%, but we've negotiated down to 5%. If they came to us and said, would you take 4.5 at 18 months? Or 4 at 12 months. We absolutely would move in that regard, trying to find a way to get this bipartisan agreement across the finish line.